You might see placemats, but I see pumpkins. Last season, I got these 4 placemats for only 60 cents on clearance, so today we're gonna see what I can make. Before I start any of my projects, I am first going to coat these placemats with glue because they are glittery. It's a pretty simple process. I'm going to use some tacky glue, add in some water, about a 1-to-1 ratio. The most important thing is that you combine the glue and water really, really well. But yeah, just brush over the entire surface and that glue is going to essentially trap the glitter so that way it stops shedding. This technique is so effective and I use it on anything that has glitter. However, this did get messy, unfortunately, because even though the backs of the placemats didn't actually have glitter applied to them, because they were all stored in the same bag, glitter did get on the backs of them, and then the backs kept shedding the entire time I was working on this project. Very frustrating, but oh well, I had to work with it. So the first thing I decided to make with the placemats is a coaster. And to do this, I made a little pumpkin template on paper. You can print out a pumpkin template, or like I did, I just pulled up an image on my laptop, put a piece of paper over my laptop screen, and then used a marker to trace the pumpkin shape onto the paper. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. Either way, create some kind of a pumpkin shaped template and then cut it out. I'm cutting out all the individual pieces and I very quickly realized it was helpful to label the pieces. Once you have your template pieces cut out, we're going to trace them on the back of the first color mat. Then I cut those pieces out of the placemat. I forgot to make a stem initially, so I went back and added that. I made 2 because I wasn't sure if I wanted to use the glittery side of the placemat or if I wanted to use the plain back side of the placemat. So once we have our pieces cut out, the basic idea here is we're going to put these pieces on top of the other color placemat with a bit of spacing around them. We're gonna cut that second piece out and that's gonna be the base of our coaster. So I flipped everything over and traced my pieces onto the back of the second placemat. Again, make sure everything is upside down. And when I traced it, I left these gaps both between the pieces and then I also left a gap when I was tracing around the templates. Once I had that cut out, I flipped everything right side over, arranged them the way I wanted, and hot glued them into place. Y'all, I am so tickled with how this turned out. I think it's so cute and I can't wait to use these. You can use the same process and make other types of coasters. For instance, you can make some fall leaves or a cute little ghost. The next pumpkin project I made with these placemats was I made these little pumpkin motifs that I'm going to turn into a garland. This is a really similar idea to the first project where we make a template and cut the pieces out. However, we're going to make this a bit more 3D and stack the pieces, so we need to use a little bit different of a technique when we trace them. The piece that goes on the very top, we're going to trace out exactly the same shape it is, but any of the pieces that will be underneath another piece, we need some excess placemat that we can use to overlap and glue it on. So for the outer edge of each piece, I traced along the template, but then on the inside, I left some excess and traced it bigger than the section so I could overlap them. Again, it helps to label all your pieces so you don't get things mixed up. When it was time to glue them all together, I placed my paper template on top of the piece, and anything that was sticking out was where I needed to put glue and cover up with the piece that goes on top of it. Using the template makes it really easy to get everything lined up, and I love the dimension of these. They look so cute with just the placemats, but I wanted to add an extra touch by adding some pumpkin stem vine curls. To do this, I took some crochet thread and wrapped it around a wooden dowel. You can also use ribbon for this. I held the ends in place with binder clips and then coated the entire thing with hairspray. I then put it in the oven at a low temperature, about 200-250 degrees Fahrenheit for about 20 to 30 minutes. The really important thing here is anything you're putting into the oven, make sure it is oven safe. After I'd left this in the oven for a little bit, I pulled it out, let it cool completely, and then removed it from the dowel. You can just straight up pull on the end to pull it off, but that kind of weakens the curl, so I personally like to slide the curl off the end so that way the curl stays nice and tight. And then once I had my curls made, all I had to do was cut down the pieces and glue them onto my 3D pumpkin motifs. The first one I glued on the front, and then I quickly realized it would just look a lot better if I did the messy gluing on the back and then just pulled the little curls to the front of the pumpkin. I love the dimension of these, and as you noticed, I played around with swapping out the different colors to give it even more dimension. For our last pumpkin, we're going to make these 3D pumpkins, and this project, y'all, I really have mixed feelings about it, and it comes down to I got really inconsistent results. But let's walk through the process first. I started off by cutting out these pointy ovals. Since my placemat has a curve to it, I just used the curved edge of the placemat to make my initial template. So I traced out a curve. I wanted to make mine 5 inches long. And then once I had the 5 inches measured, I lined up the curve with those 2 marks to create the other side of the shape. Hopefully you figured out what I was doing. So then I traced the template onto the back of a placemat. Once I got my first pointy oval cut out, I decided to use that as my template going forward just because it's easier to trace around the thick placemat than it is around the paper template. And I just kept going and cut out a whole bunch in both colors. Once I had my pieces cut out, I used a needle to punch a hole in either end. Of course, safety first, don't stab yourself. What I did to make it really simple is I took some of my scraps and stacked them up, and then I laid my piece that I was punching a hole in on top of that and punched the needle through. It protected my work surface and gave the needle somewhere safe to go. So then once all these pieces were cut out and all my holes were made, I threaded one end of the ovals together. When I threaded them on, I wanted it to be every other color, and I also made sure that the faces were matching, meaning the sparkly faces touched sparkly faces, the flat faces touched flat faces, basically every other one getting flipped over. Once I strung up that first end, I tied them together and then repeated on the other end. When I repeat on the other end, I'm threading through in the same exact order. Once you have both ends tied up, it is time to flip the pieces out. So you're gonna kind of squish at either end to get the pieces to bow out, and then you're going to flip the ones over that need to be flipped and fan them out. Yeah, this is the part where I really struggled. This step is easy to do, but it's hard to get it to look right. A big part of it is I really wanted the top to go kind of inward like you would on a pumpkin versus having all these triangles sitting on the top. My prototype that I did off camera went flawlessly, got it to look great. Then when I tried to film, I tried multiple times filming this step and it was still hit or miss whether I could quite get the look that I wanted to or not. And here's the thing, guys, that is okay. That's just part of the crafting life. And a lot of times with projects, even if things aren't going perfect, if you stick with it, you can still end up with something that works. So in my case, I did the best I could to try to tuck the tops inwards with mixed levels of success. I did have a piece break, and if a piece breaks, no big deal, we'll just glue it in place. Once I had things fluffed and looking a way that I was satisfied with, I took the strings from either end and tied them in the middle just to kind of hold it rounded and so it doesn't flatten out. And once I tied those pieces off securely, I cut the excess. For the stem, I took one of my scrap pieces of placemat and rolled a little tube that I hot glued together. I rolled the tube out of a rectangle and I struggled with the gluing a little bit. The one kind of came undone. That's just because my placemats are really thick. But anyways, once I got a stem made, I glued it to the center of my pumpkin. And y'all, the stem fixes a lot of issues with these pumpkins, both because it can hide that messy, all the corners and points sticking out all crazy, and because if you really load it up with glue, then you can get the fanned out pieces to stick to the stem a little bit better and stay in place. Again, I don't know how much sense I'm making as I'm talking, but hopefully you can get an idea of what I'm doing. And then I wanted to be extra with these as well, so I took those leftover curly pieces I had and glued them onto the tops of my pumpkins. Now, I was using glitter glue. I've had this for forever and I've been trying to find a project for it. Oh my gosh, the glitter glue looked awesome. I really oozed it and made it really thick around the bases of the stem, and it kind of made it look like the stem was going into the pumpkin more versus just being a cylinder sticking out of the top. Anyways, I think it turned out really cool. And those pumpkins were all put together. So now that I have everything made, it is time to decorate with them. The coasters, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory how to decorate with them. I will be using this for many cups of warm tea through the fall season. Also, hopefully some hot apple cider, delicious. With the pumpkin motifs, I strung them up with some leaves that I'd also gotten for really cheap on clearance last year. And I hung that garland on the end of a shelf where I already have this ribbon. I think this looks so pretty and I really like the pop of color and shine that the glittery pumpkins add. With the little 3D pumpkins, those can go on a shelf, in a bowl, on a tray, wherever you want to use them. And again, they're gonna add a nice pop of color and sparkle to your decor. While I was doing my decorating, I also decided to update my snowman from my spring and summer look and get it ready for fall. I keep this in my bathroom and I change out what's inside for the different seasons. And if you wanna learn how I put that snowman together, I've got a video that goes through that. So now I feel officially all ready for fall. Here where I'm at, it's the first day of fall, and I could not be more thrilled. I'm ready for the cool weather, the falling leaves, the pumpkin bread, and all the fall things. So I hope y'all enjoyed seeing what I made today. I hope you all have a happy first day of fall and happy crafting.